Hello friends, welcome back to my channel. My name is Steph. So this week we are doing a weekly reading vlog and I'm literally on my way to go see Noelle from Noelle 7 Pages with the roomies. The roomies are on their way to come pick me up. I have my suitcase right here. I'm ready to go. I'm really excited. We are celebrating Noelle's birthday, so this is gonna be really fun. I know Noelle has a bunch of plans for us and I'm really looking forward to this weekend. I definitely need it. My life has been interesting. But I wanted to come on here before I left to do an introduction, but also let you know what I'm going to be focusing on this week. And as a matter of fact, I don't really have a TBR. I have one book on my TBR that I know for sure I'm going to be reading, and otherwise everything else is kind of up in the air. I also figure that this weekend we're not going to do that much reading, but on the drive there and the drive back, I will be reading Throne of Glass. So this is actually a reread for me, but I first read the Throne of Glass series back in 2017 and I ended up getting to book 5 or 6 in the series. I took a little too much time between the 3rd and the 4th book, but I finished the 4th book and I really enjoyed it. So far, I think it's like my favorite book in the series, but who really knows because it's been so long. But I think that was my favorite book. I remember it the most, but maybe that's because that's the one that I've read the most recently. And then I tried to go into Empire of Storms and just too much time had passed. And at that point in the series, there were so many different characters and different plot lines happening that I was just very confused. So years later, I decided I'm going to try again. And I remember enjoying them, but I don't remember them enough to say anything about it. So all I remember about this series is Celaena Sardothien is like the most notorious assassin in Otterland. Is that what it's called? But she has been put into these salt mines as a slave because of a crime that she seems to have been framed for, and she is taken out of the salt mine and slavery to become the king's champion. I'm not gonna lie, I am excited to dive back in. I feel like every time I read Sarah J Maas, it feels like popcorn where I just want to keep reading and it gets me through the series much quicker than I anticipate because I just want to keep reading. So I'm hoping to have that kind of experience again. Maybe I'll get through a few of the books in this vlog, but I don't really know. We are starting with Throne of Glass and we'll see where we go from there. Otherwise, hopefully I'll talk to you when I'm at Noelle's.
It terrifying.
Happy September. It's officially spooky season. I mean, spooky season kind of lives on in my home forever, but the excitement, the ramp up to spooky season really starts in September. I fully acknowledge that people are still living out their summer dreams, and I am so happy for them. I'm living out my fall dream here, and we can coexist. We can happily coexist because it's still gonna be hot, so you can still live your summer dreams. I'm just gonna be in my home in sweaters, drinking out of spooky mugs and decorating my home, which I did do yesterday. And I also got back from Noelle's yesterday. It was such a fun time. It was really what I needed. I had gotten some really bad news in regards to my work right before going on this trip, so I wasn't sure how I was gonna feel. It was so nice being with everybody and celebrating Noelle and just like getting to hang out. We don't get to do that very often. So I'm so glad that we got that time because it was really fun. We did a lot of really cool things, but we also just like hung out and talked and like were together, you know, bonding, friendship things. That being said, I did most of my reading in the car, so I didn't have much time or thought to update about how I was feeling about my reread of Throne of Glass. But I am now 271 pages in. I'm on chapter 36. So I did read a good portion in the car, and last night I read a pretty good portion of this as well before going to bed. And so I'm having a fun time. This reread has been really fun. I am surprised at how much I remember of this book. I remember it so well. It's really nice to have that feeling of like revisiting a book and still having fun with it. Despite my fantasy taste changing so much throughout the years since reading this book, and the fact that like I don't really read a lot of YA anymore, it still reads young. I mean, I think Sarah J Maas was like 16 when she wrote this. I don't mind it. Like, I know a lot of people say, oh, it's so hard to get into Throne of Glass series. The first two books aren't that good. But I distinctly remember really enjoying the first two books. So yeah, I'm having a lot of fun. I don't have anything profound to say about it other than I'm having a good time, and I understand why Sarah J Maas is so popular, and I understand why Throne of Glass is so popular. For now, I'm probably gonna finish Throne of Glass before I have to go to work. I have my closing shift today, and I think I could finish this chunk before I go to work. I also wanted to show you a little book haul. Noelle ended up giving all of us our birthday presents for this year when we visited, and Jared surprised me with the book. Firstly, Noelle got me The Bookshop and the Barbarian. So she said that the reason she picked this one is because I love Legends and Lattes, and this sounded like Legends and Lattes, and she wasn't kidding. So it says, explore its many rooms, pick something nice off the shelf, and have a little read by the fire at the Cozy Quill Bookshop. Running from strife in her homeland, Marabella Waters becomes the new owner of the fabled Cozy Quill. After finding squatters on her property, she employs Asteria Helsdatir, a giant barbarian warrior woman more accustomed to swinging an axe than opening a book. Together, the odd couple must make a success out of the bookshop and survive a dizzying procession of seasonal festivals. Noelle also said she heard this was sapphic, so I am so excited to read this. It's also very short. It's 187 pages. And then Jared surprised me with Rouge from Mona Awad. So I really loved Bunny, and this is her, I don't know, third or fourth novel. And this is supposed to be about like the skincare industry and people getting obsessed with skincare and vanity. And I'm very much looking forward to this read because I love skincare, but I also like see how toxic sometimes that community can be. So I'm looking forward to like the commentary that's in here and what Mona Awad does, because she kind of does fever dream type books, and that's really why I loved Bunny. I didn't enjoy All's Well that much, and only because the chronic rep pain was a little too close to home and it made me feel very uncomfortable, so I ended up DNFing it. But I'm sure that book is equally as good if it doesn't trigger you the way that it triggered me.
It's been so long, you've been so tough, you've kept it up, you've kept me up, been standing tall, keeping strong, and I'm doing well, I'm eating more, and though you might think that you're fine, you need someone, and though you've been bit time. You need someone to love.
Good morning. I literally just woke up like maybe 40 minutes ago, and I'm so tired this week. I think I even said it yesterday that I was very tired. You know how some weeks it just feels like you can't catch up on sleep at all? So yeah, that is how I'm feeling this morning. I just feel like I can't catch up, but I finished Throne of Glass yesterday and I immediately went into Crown of Midnight. So I think it's safe to say that I'm in it, okay? So much so that I picked up Heir of Fire last night at the library before I left. I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna grab Heir of Fire just in case. So yeah, I finished Throne of Glass. When I read it the first time, I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. And I know it's not a masterpiece. Like, there are things to be desired. There are things that need to be more fleshed out. There are things with characters that should be better developed. But I had a fun time my first time around, and I didn't really have any critiques. Because I'm gonna be honest, if a series can give me fun and I just get quickly immersed into the story and want to know more about these characters and want to dive into the next book immediately after finishing the first one, that's all I can really ask for sometimes. And that's what the Throne of Glass series does for me. Even though I never finished it, it wasn't for lack of enjoyment. It was always because I didn't remember who characters were and I didn't remember plot points. So it was like not a fun time diving into it and being like, I don't know anything that's happening. Now I'm rereading my Throne of Glass experience. Exactly the same. It's a 4-star. I had a lot of fun. I immediately wanted to go into Crown of Midnight. I felt those nostalgic feelings and remembered why I had so much fun with this series. And like the first 2 books, people critique a lot, but I'm like, I don't know. It's fun. It's just kind of carefree fun. She's 18 years old and she is very much a teenager at that time, and you get to see glimpses of that. And I kind of like that. I don't really love when characters are supposed to be teenagers and then they just act like they're in their 30s. But I think what's fun is that Celaena is a character who's had really rough circumstances, but also has this like girly teenager side that's really relatable. And it is very much like, this was how I was at 18. I was an assassin, yeah, and I loved chocolate and dresses. No, but seriously, I just think that like glimpses of Celaena being a teenager and reminding you that she's 18, that she is a teenager, and despite things that she's seen and things that she's supposedly done in the past, she is a teenager. And you get to see those parts of it. And I think it's also very reflective in the romance that's in here. And I know people don't love love triangles, but I think it's funny because it didn't really feel as heavy as a love triangle as other books. Like one I could think of is Shadow and Bone, I guess. This one felt less of a love triangle because there was a clear distinction between how she felt about the 2 love interests. I think book 2, you see more of that love triangle than in book 1. Like it feels more of a love triangle in book 2 so far. But I am of the unpopular opinion that I have fun with love triangles. I don't know. I enjoy them. They're not like something I seek out in books, but when they happen, I'm not bothered by them, I guess. So I'm not one to talk, really. Truly. The other fun thing about this read, which I'm not sure if I mentioned it actually in my last update, I remember so much of this book, but I realized by the end that I had mixed up things between 1 and 2. So there are some plot points in book 2 that I thought we were going to see in book 1, and then I realized very quickly that it was going to happen in book 2. So it's really funny how much I remember of the first 2 books. I feel like Heir of Fire is where I'm going to struggle to remember things. So I'm interested to see what ends up becoming my favorite of those 4 books. I'm not even counting the other ones because I never read them and I didn't have any opinion on them. But I am curious how I'll feel about the rest of the series in general, especially the ending. I'm also very interested in my opinions on Calie throughout the rest of this series, and reading Tower of Dawn and Empire of Storms in tandem. I think I'm gonna try to tandem read them. I don't really know if that's gonna work for me. I don't know if I'm gonna be able to do that. I'm just so ready for Manon. That is my favorite character. She's my #1 character and I love her. You know what else is also just jarring for me is that these first 2 books make me want to become a Calie apologist. I'm not, but it's making me want to be. Anyway, I'm rambling on. I'm enjoying my time. hello. I always look disheveled because you always get me right after I've had breakfast and my tea of the day to wake up, because I usually read during that time too. So it's like I want to update you on what I'm reading immediately because all my thoughts are right there for the taking. Anyway, I'm on Air of Fire. I finished Crown of Midnight. I'm only like 7 or 8 chapters in, but we've met Hanan. So she is in the 3rd book, and the way we meet her is so badass. And I think that's why Queen of Shadows has always been my #1 favorite of the 4 that I read, because of Hanan. So immediately when her name was uttered in the audiobook, I was like screaming because I was so excited that Hanan was here and that it was earlier in the books than I thought. Also, just the way that we're introduced to her. What a great setup. What a badass setup for a badass character. Anyway, I'm having a great time with my reread, although I'm gonna say it and I know that people are gonna get mad at me. I'm not a Rowan stan. I don't really like Rowan as a character very much. Like, at least what I read of him, I distinctly remember him in the 3rd book and not really enjoying him in the 3rd book, but I'm hoping that this time around it'll be a little bit different, although our introduction hasn't really proven to change my opinions on him yet. I'm not necessarily his biggest fan. I'm hoping that'll change once I get through this whole series. Hello, good morning. So I'm reading Air of Fire, as you know, 232 pages into it. I want to finish this today or tomorrow, but I don't know if I'm gonna be able to. I don't know what it is about Air of Fire. Like, I remember when I first read this series, most people were like, oh, you're gonna love Air of Fire. It's where everything picks up. It's where the story gets really interesting. But I was already interested and invested in the first 2 books. But I completely understand because obviously the stakes are much higher in here. We have so many different reveals about characters and like where this plot potentially is going that we really didn't have in the first 2 books. The first 2 books admittedly feel like very nostalgic, early 2010s, you know, fantasy. And I've seen critiques that the first 2 books should have been 1 book, but I actually love Crown of Midnight. I think I said this in another clip. I really love Crown of Midnight. Of the 4 books that I read, Queen of Shadows is my #1, and then it's Crown of Midnight, Throne of Glass, and then Air of Fire. And I know that's probably shocking, but Throne of Glass like introduces you into these characters in this world, so I feel like first books are always very fun for me. But I am a second book kind of girl, so it doesn't surprise me that I love Crown of Midnight. I also love Nehemia, and I like a lot of the things that are unfolding in Crown of Midnight because it's such a different tone. You see that shift in tone that we are now getting in Air of Fire. And it's not to say that I don't like the tone in Air of Fire, because I actually do really like the tone in here, and I like a lot of the plot points. There's something about the pacing in this one that when I first read it, it took me the longest to get through, and it wasn't my favorite like I thought it was gonna be. And at the time I thought maybe it was just because I went in with really high expectations, and like I said, I'm not the biggest Rowan fan. He is not my favorite character, and this is very much an introduction to Rowan. Like, we are getting a lot of Rowan in here, obviously, because of circumstances. And so maybe that's why I don't love this one as much. I don't really know. So I thought going into it the second time that maybe I would have a different experience, but I'm actually experiencing a very similar feeling where I feel like I'm reading this so much slower. And it's not that I'm disliking it, like I'm very interested in the plot, and I'm excited that I'm getting through this because I'm realizing how invested I am in this plot. And I don't actually know any spoilers about Throne of Glass, so please don't put anything in the comments down below that could potentially spoil me, because I realize that I don't really know anything about where this is going. I don't know how it's gonna end. There's one spoiler that I know, and like I wasn't that upset about knowing that spoiler, and it happens to be about Calie. But yeah, there's just something about this one that's a little bit slower for me, and maybe it's just because politics are really starting to come into play. We are starting to see threads of things from the first 2 books coming together and being expounded upon, and like where that potentially is going to go in the future. We're seeing characters in different places, and maybe that's my problem. I historically tend to like a book less when your main characters are constantly split up, and so this is the first book where your main characters that we've had together for 2 books are split up. But I think once you get used to that in this book, moving forward, it's not so jarring, because there are a few characters that are being introduced in here that we haven't met yet that are not really part of the group that I'm assuming will be because I don't fully remember Queen of Shadows that well. Now that I'm saying this, I don't actually remember the plot of it that well. I just remember it was my first favorite of the 4 that I read. Anyway, I'm trying to finish this over the weekend and hopefully, you know, my feelings change by the end of it, or like I still have some good feelings about it by the end of it. Anyway, I have reading sprints in like 15 minutes, so I'm gonna go on there and start reading this. I also need to film a video, so I'll probably do that in one of the sprints. And today, if anybody cares, Goose, our new cat, is getting neutered. So this is a really big step and a great step because it means that he can finally like roam the house. The girls and him have been introduced. We have controlled, you know, interactions between them, but now that he's fixed, once he heals, we're gonna have like a play date where they actually get to interact with each other, and we'll see how it goes. Obviously, it's gonna be controlled in the sense that we're gonna be there to make sure everything's safe, but I'm excited. I'm excited to see how it all goes, but I'm also very nervous.
Take a train ride just to see you. Ride for hours just to please you. You don't know how much I need you, 'cause you're my home away from away from home, away from being alone. Run away from home, why don't you?
Hello friends, so it is Friday and Goose had a surgery today. He just got home from surgery, so I went and like snuggled with him for an hour because he was really like disoriented obviously, but as soon as he got home he was purring up a storm. You could tell he was very relieved to be home. It's also like really sweet to think that he does genuinely consider this his home and he feels safe here. I just feel really good about that. But he's doing really well. They said he did great, but he's gonna have a pretty long recovery process just because of, I remembered the word, it's cryptorchid, just because that is such an invasive surgery. So he's gonna have more, you know, healing time than an average neutering or spaying. But he's doing well right now. He is past out, so I decided to update, and I'm gonna make some lunch for myself because I have not eaten today and I wanted him to like be relaxed enough before I left the room. So I will show you him in his little cone in a minute. I'm not gonna show any of the incisions or anything like that if you were worried about that. I am not somebody who likes to see stuff like that, so I would never show that on purpose. But anyway, I'm also reading Heir of Fire, so I'm really hoping that I could finish it today or potentially like get very close to finishing it today. So I'll update you a little bit later, especially after I have eaten because I am so hungry. Friends, I don't know when the last time I updated was, but this weekend has been weird. But I think I did actually do a clip updating y'all that Goose, our newest cat, our newest kitten, he just got surgery, like a whole invasive surgery. And so I brought him home on Friday afternoon, and it's just been a lot of like giving him medicine and making sure he's doing okay. And I've been reading, but I just haven't had the time to update, and that's just been very consuming. It's now Sunday morning. I have finished Heir of Fire, and I have mixed feelings about this one. And I knew going into it that I also had mixed feelings about it because I remember this being the weakest book for me of the series, but feeling so conflicted about that because there are so many things that happen in here and so many characters that are introduced in here that I love and that I thought were really compelling and interesting and are definitely going to make the plot going forward more complex and interesting. But something about this book, like the pacing was really off for me. One of my patrons, Aden, actually pointed out that maybe the reason the pacing is so off in here is because this is the first book where Sarah J. Maas was actually doing like multiple POVs and diving into more than like 2 POV changes in here. I know that in Throne of Glass and Crown of Midnight, we kind of get some POV POV changes, but in here, like, we are for sure getting new POVs. Some of them aren't even interacting with Celaena at all, or any of the other main characters that we've been introduced to so far. And then we obviously have some new POVs where they are interacting with main characters that we already know, but they, I think, are going to play really pivotal roles in the future of these books. I wouldn't know. The next book is the last book that I've read in the series, and I'm really looking forward to my next read because I loved Queen of Shadows when I read it the first time. It was my favorite of the 4 that I had picked up, and so I'm assuming that it'll probably be the same because my feelings have basically remained the same this whole rereading experience. Heir of Fire last time was definitely the weakest for me. I don't really care about Rowan. Like, I like him as an individual character. Do I like where I know his story is going? I don't know. I don't know that I care about that. You know, we get the introduction to Manon in here, and she is one of my favorite characters, so glad to continue to see that. I remain really enjoying Chaol and Daryan. Like, Daryan is my favorite male lead within this whole series, but I also really enjoy Chaol, and I know that's an unpopular opinion. And listen, I'm not a Chaol apologist by any means. I don't think that things should work out between certain people, but I just enjoy Chaol as a character. I think he's such an interesting and complex character, and I'm wondering if that's just because, like, Daryan, Celaena, and Chaol are the characters that you're introduced to from the very beginning, so there's a lot of complexity that you're already introduced to with them, and that continues, and like as their relationships develop and become more complicated and different and shift because of different things happening in this world, like, it's very compelling to me. So I think that the fact that they were introduced from the very beginning makes it harder for me to hate Chaol. Not that I don't hate the actions that he's taken or the things that he said or the way that he thinks about things, but I just like the complexity of all of these relationships. And I'm not necessarily looking forward to Tower of Dawn, but I kind of am, if only to see if it's as bad as everyone says. But yeah, Heir of Fire was a little bit difficult for me because it's like one of the books in the series that I feel has the weirdest pacing, but also has this really great arc that is changing the trajectory of so many things for our characters, but especially Celaena. But I understand why people would say that Heir of Fire is probably the book that will determine whether or not you want to move forward with the series or not, because it has the most pivotal changes in here that are kind of foreshadowing or showing you what the rest of the series is probably going to look like. And I think the beginning 2 books, which I said before, are almost in ways like they have this carefree, nostalgic nature about them. And I think it's just because it does have that really classic YA feel. And also just the fact that Celaena is 18 years old and, you know, she's for the first time in her life on the cusp of freedom, right? And whether or not that happens, she's on this cusp of freedom and having the opportunity to kind of just live in the moment and live a little and treat herself and to kind of just be youthful for a time, right? And be a little carefree. Not that she is carefree. I'm not saying that she's carefree at all. I just mean that, like, there are moments where she has really fun, carefree moments with, like, Nehemia and with Chaol and Daryan, and it feels probably like the one and only time she's been able to be a teenager. Although Crown of Midnight, obviously the last 10% especially have like a real dark tone to them. It really starts to shift into what we're seeing in Heir of Fire. And I think that's what's great about this series as well, is like the tonal shifts feel appropriate to things that are happening and like they carry over in ways that make sense. I also think that the grief and the trauma and the loss that we see in here feels very raw and I relate to it at times. I don't think it's one of those situations where like your best friend dies and then 2 seconds later you're just moving on. Like, I think Celaena as the main character who's been through a lot of loss and grief really carries it with her, and so I really appreciate that exploration and I appreciate the way that that is done because it feels more realistic. And honestly, I've always said that about Sarah J Maas, at least for the ACOTAR series. You know, everything that Farah goes through, she really carries that with her, and you see a lot of her trying to heal through trauma in the second book, and I think that's why I love the second book in that series so much. I'm not saying this is a literary masterpiece and you have every right to dislike Sarah J Maas and be sick of hearing about her as an author, but I do think she does a few things really, really well, and that's why I keep coming back to her work, and I just have a lot of fun overall. Anyway, yeah, I'm having a lot of fun rereading these. Crown of Midnight still remains my favorite of the three, which I know is an unpopular opinion. But it is, I just really loved Crown of Midnight. I don't know what it is about that book other than I just really love Nehemia as a character, and obviously I'm very character driven, so I'm very invested in these character arcs and like what's gonna happen with them. And I still continue to really like Celaena as a main character. She's not my favorite character of this bunch by any means, but I definitely really like her and I enjoy being in her POV when we have it. But I am glad that there are multiple perspectives in here because there are characters that I do love more than Celaena, but I do enjoy her as a main character overall. Oh, and I don't know if I said all my ratings for each book, but Throne of Glass was 4 stars, Crown of Midnight was like a 4.5 stars, and then Heir of Fire is a 3.75 stars. Like I said, something about this pacing really threw me off, and it took me so much longer than I feel it should have to read this. So I gave it a 3.75. I did round it down on Goodreads, but it is technically a 3.75. That being said, thank you so much for spending the week with me. I had a lot of fun rereading Throne of Glass so far, and hopefully this continues to be the trend, me having fun with this series. If you've made it this far and you have nothing else to say, feel free to leave like a crown emoji or some sword emojis, whatever you feel like, and I will talk to you next week. Bye.